Did you enjoy watching Game of Thrones? If so, you must be excited for House of the Dragon. Even if you haven't watched Game of Thrones, we're sure you'll still be just as excited for the upcoming HBO series. Keep watching closely for everything you need to know about the prequel to Game of Thrones. Firstly, when does the show premiere? Take a deep breath, everyone. House of the Dragon, HBO's first show after Game of Thrones, starts in less than 2 weeks. The upcoming prequel will take us back to a time when the Targaryens were at the top of their power, and dragons ruled the skies over King's Landing. In House of the Dragon, there is a civil war called the Dance of the Dragons. It is sure to be bloody, and people will die. With that being said, it has been reported that the House of the Dragon will not be based on the books of Game of Thrones. So what do they have in store? Stick around to find out more, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel to get notified of our newest editions. As we said, House of the Dragon is not based on a traditional book like Game of Thrones is. Instead, it uses George R.R. Martin's book Fire and Blood, a fake history book that uses several different, sometimes contradictory stories to show what an in-world historian thinks might have happened during the dance. It's a lot of fun, and each story is colored by the opinion of the person who wrote it. Some of these thoughts, like the dwarf court jester mushrooms, are sure to be very colorful. So, will House of the Dragon be as violent as Game of Thrones? We want to say that in House of the Dragon, things will be a little less sad. We wouldn't lie to you though, the Dance of the Dragons is one of the most violent times in Westeros history, and it has just as many shocking turns as any episode of Game of Thrones would. When Game of Thrones was on TV, fans all over the world liked to compare the show to the books that inspired it. How was it so similar to A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin? What was different about it? Where was Lady Stoneheart? And did we even need her in the first place? But it was a strange idea to try to bring different contradictory stories to life on screen. House of the Dragon will give a more clear picture of what happened. There may be some differences between the book and the actual events. We're more interested in playing with history the way it was written. It's basically saying that this is the truth about what happened, showrunner Ryan Condal told IGN. This show is fun because it's like a companion to a history book. It talks to the reader about history. In a way, that means that some things will fit together. Different things will be said about other things. But the point is that the events are the same in the end. Only the why and how of things change as you learn more about history. So, how do they pull off the history book feel? In Fire and Blood, a character named Archmaester Gildane, a historian trying to write the definitive book on Targaryen history, sorts through different stories about the Dance of the Dragons that don't agree with each other. One of the funniest things about the book is that it has various records with different levels of doubt. However, it was thought that it might be too complicated for TV viewers. At least two of the people in most of the historical stories that Fire and Blood's fictional author, Archmaester Gildane, was reading weren't even alive at the time. He also wasn't there when the things that happened did happen. If you believe Mushroom was, but one was written after the fact. Then Gildane lived long after the Targaryens, said Condal. We're taking the view that how history is told changes how the story is told, because historians can only know so much about what happened. Primary sources and accounts from people who were there are so important, but not all of that was in this. Some things will happen in ways that will surprise people who have read the book, given what they know about the history behind it. Are you a Mushroom fan? If you are, keep watching closely because we have news you definitely want to hear. Up next, what has George R.R. Martin said about the upcoming show? In the huge new issue of Hollywood Spotlight called The Complete Guide to House of the Dragon, author George R.R. Martin talked about why the idea of the different stories wasn't used in the show. In the guide, Martin says that at one point, the team thought about adding Archmaester Gildane and the different sources of information he was looking at. If you like Game of Thrones and want a similar experience with House of the Dragon, the good news is that it is based on one of Martin's books, just like Game of Thrones was. The good news is that this one is already done. Martin's book, Fire and Blood, is the source material for House of the Dragon. The show's event will cover about the last third of the book. Fire and Blood is not a traditional novel. Instead, it is a fake history book that tells the stories of the Targaryen kings, from Aegon the Conqueror to the end of the Dance of the Dragons. That's about 150 years of history, and the Dance of the Dragons is just the climax of that dynastic story. So how did the writers finally decide which viewpoint to stick with? In Fire and Blood, the story is told from the viewpoint of a maester, looking at 3 different historical accounts of the same events. Because of this, we often get other points of view and many rumors that make it hard to know what happened. So the writers of House of the Dragon have much more freedom than in Game of Thrones to decide how to show things. Even with all that, we can tell from the book that some big things will happen. The question is more about how they they will be done on the show. The author talks about how the show would have used Gildayan's academic research as a framing story that would appear at the start of each episode, before the scene changed to whatever event he was researching, like the BBC show I, Claudius from the 1970s. But in the end, Martin says that plan was thrown out because viewers might have found it too complicated. So we did think about putting House of the Dragon in a frame. We thought about giving Archmaester Gildayan a role and having him write Fire and Blood with a young apprentice. We'd see him switching back and forth between these different drafts. They would say, well, this is how I see it, and we could talk about that. Then he said, oh, but no, here's another one. We talked about Mushroom's version. Some people thought it might be too hard. So in the end, we decided no, we would do it straight and pick and choose from 3 or 4 versions, or maybe even combine a couple of versions to come up with a new version. Read Fire and Blood if you want to get in on the ground floor and be able to compare the book to the show when House of the Dragon comes out. Lastly, why might Mushroom fans be disappointed? Martin has already written down everything that will happen in House of the Dragon, which is not the case with his A Song of Ice and Fire series. Martin has said that he wants to write a sequel to Fire and Blood, but that book will be about the history of Westeros in the years after the story of the show ends. Fire and Blood tells the whole story of the civil war shown in House of the Dragon, from the beginning to the bloody end. This means you can now find out what happens to characters like Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen, Alicent Hightower, and Corlys Velaryon. Fire and Blood came out for the first time in 2018. The book is available in hardcover, trade paperback, mass market paperback, audio, and ebook formats. HBO has even put out a version of the book with a new cover that looks like dragon scales. Mushroom fans might be disappointed that he and Archmaester Gildayan probably won't be in House of the Dragon, but it sounds like the way the show ended up going about things gave them a chance to go much deeper into the characters and emotional arcs behind the dance. Co-showrunner Miguel Sapochnik, who also directed some of the most important episodes of Game of Thrones, thinks that working from a book like Fire and Blood that didn't spell out everything in detail was a big plus. I think it was a gift because it gave us things to do, he told IGN. Not just think about what they did, but also how and why they did it. I really think it was a blessing. So what do you think might happen in House of the Dragon? Let us know in the comments below. And also don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more content just like this.